Welcome back to the Joseph Ram Show. Today, I'm bringing you a friend of mine, not someone that's just a master online, even though he is, not someone that's just done businesses multiple different ways from MLMs to affiliate marketing to podcasting to helping people. He does a bunch of different things. So today I have with me Jeff Ross. Now, you have 85 million titles, so I'm not going to just pick one. Like, I know there's a caffeinated kangaroo. I know you have a home church. Like, you do all this stuff, but in your own words, tell people who you are, what you do, and how you help them.
Yeah, brilliant question. And yeah, serial entrepreneur, got many irons in the fire. But basically, to sum it all up, is I help people find their voice. I help them to elevate their voice. I help them to leverage their voice, and I help them to amplify their voice.
Mm. No, I like that, but you got to go a little deeper there because you just dropped a big bomb, but it's kind of like, I'm just going to tease you, which is what he does online all the time to get people to come in. You should be following his page. You should be in his group. So, how do you even help people amplify their voice? What does that even mean to you?
That's the reason why I did that because you're you're a master yourself. Um, okay, so let's go deeper. Basically, I see a lot of people online, yelling and shouting and saying, buy my stuff, blah blah blah, spammy Tammies and direct pitch Peters and all those in between. But nobody really knows how to connect. And I was myself was guilty of this when I first started. It's like you're shouting at the rooftop, yeah, 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 but nobody's connecting. So I slowed down and I really got into the whole art of heart-to-heart conversations, the heart-to-heart connections. And this whole find my voice conversation really came from that premise to go deeper into this space to find what your heart is in the first place. Because how can you have a heart-to-heart conversation if you don't know your own heart? How can you really go love your neighbor if you don't love yourself? That type of conversation. So it's very much learning to, master your mission. Figure out what is the intent, what is the purpose, because I guarantee you it's not money. Money is the probably the thing that got you started in the online space, especially, but it's not the thing that'll sustain you and keep you here and keep you going. If it was money, then why are majority of athletes, celebrities, rock stars, why aren't they happy?
Mhm.
You talk to a lot of those people, and some are, don't get me wrong, this is more a majority, and some are, but most of them will say that they're living empty, disconnected lives. So there's a key word for you, disconnected, right? So I believe the world is starving for connection. I believe the world is starving for truth. But ultimately, in that whole premise is the world starving for love.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
and in that love, we find connection, we find respect, we find those things that bring us together, not divide us. And in that, we find our voice, we find our true voice, our true meaning. And this whole conversation then shifts from being a transactional conversation to a mission matters most, an impact, a legacy type conversation. And let's face it, our world, especially in current circumstances, is divided, and that division is getting further and further and further apart. I really believe that the answer to this equation is for people to learn to love themselves, to learn to love something bigger than themselves, i.e., God, and to learn to love their neighbors. Now, that whole conversation is not an external conversation, that's an internal conversation. It starts with learning to love yourself. Now, I'm not talking about ego and arrogance and pride. That's half the reason why we've got so much trouble in the world. I'm talking about that learning to truly love yourself like God loves you in that space that you can then go be of service to the greater good impact. And it's not about you anymore. It's about the mission matters most.
Mhm.
Look at all the great stories of the world, Martin Luther King, Paul, Jesus, all of the great stories, they all have one great thing in common, is they were working towards something that was bigger than themselves, and they found their voice through connection, through love.
Well, let's go deeper here because I like it, and I've known you for a while, and your message and how you present yourself and how you help people is based on the foundation of who you are now. But you weren't always this person because I know a little bit about your background. 10 years
Yeah.
ago, you were an atheist, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me on the story. And now you're not only a brilliant entrepreneur, but you're a pastor of an online church. And your heart and your message is to help people first, which in the sales world, a lot of times is flipped because someone's like, well, I got to get my money, show me my money, do my thing. What made you, and I just even want to go there, what made you go from being an atheist, and I'm assuming at that point you had a lot of stuff going on, to now you've flipped the script to where before I don't believe in God, there's nothing there. I'm doing super high level atheist statements to who you are now and this heart-centered passion, purpose, plan that you're talking about. How did that change happen? Because it doesn't just happen that easily. And second, how did it intertwine into how you serve others now?
Yeah, brilliant question. And I had my road to Damascus moment sort of thing where I was stopped in my tracks. And I now, and it's actually over 11 years now. Um, since that moment, I now realize sitting here on the other side of the conversation that I was very ignorant and I was very naive atheist. I basically adopted my father's point of view, the world point of view of that. And I was very sheltered from this conversation. I was the kid that went to school when scripture or religion classes were on. My father basically forced the school with send them to note to school, my son is not to attend any of that stuff. So I had to sit out in the hallway when any of that stuff was on. And because my father grew up in a Mormon family,
Mhm.
and he basically rebelled big time and shut it right down. And I don't blame him. He had religion forced down his throat. And so that was my upbringing. I was sort of very, anything that ever come on that was evangelistic or Christian, orientated on TV, my father would walk in and he would take the Mickey, Australian slang, you'd take the piss. He would come in and say, "Oh, hallelujah," but it was a real sort of, sarcastic satire sort of way of doing it. And so that was our upbringing as kids, in the secular world. And to layer that on, very much you can't trust anybody. You got to do it all your own. You got to keep up with the Joneses type sort of conversation, right? Dad worked very very hard, but he played hard too, and it was very much hedonistic, culture, live for the moment type culture because tomorrow's not going to be here. And so I grew up that in my teens and in my early 20s, and I lived that culture. I played that out. I got involved with, gambling. I got involved with partying every pretty night pretty much to a point where I was, on some serious crazy stuff and drinking a lot and gambling a lot, and then I met my beautiful wife who comes from a totally opposite background, from a Catholic background. And she comes from a space where her aunts, like five of her aunts, are nuns,
Oh, wow.
and in that space, and so sort of come from a very anti-religious background, and then married someone who was come from a very religious background. But Sarah was sort of in a beautiful mix in between, and met me where I was at. Anyway, so we got married, and the first 12, 18 months was really, really awesome. We lived for the moment, and I'm a pretty headstrong guy and in that space and whatnot. And then Sarah's mother got terminally ill with ovarian cancer. Early on into our marriage, so we made the decision. One of the things that my dad did instill me is families first. So
Mhm.
I had a very, very high successful paying sales job for a business coaching college in Brisbane. I gave that up so Sarah could move down, to her mum and be her mum's full-time carer. In that whole scenario, an old injury that I had come back to bite me on the bum just 4 months later. I had it in my early 20s. I had a horse jump on my neck, and
Ooh.
I worked for probably about 6 years after that, but it just got to a point where I couldn't anymore. Actually, lost mobility of my right arm, and the pain was just too much. And, like it got to a crisis moment in that space. So, in the matter of getting married, in the matter of 2, 3 years, gone from living a very hedonistic lifestyle, living for the moment, look like had the success, look like had all the blah blah blah, and yeah, mum's got terminally ill with cancer, so Sarah's now looking after her mum. I've pretty much become onto a disability pension because of that old injury. And to tap it all off, we had Harrison, who at the time was a baby, and we had Lachlan on the way.
Mm.
And so everything came to a head. And so the cancer battle with mum was about 2.5 year battle. We lost her after 2.5 years, and then I saw Sarah go through that. And at that time, it's like, well, everything's coming to a head. We're all over, our marriage is all over, but the shouting. But I took one last ditch attempt to try and rescue things, and in my head, the only way to rescue it was to move states. Let's get away from family. Let's get away from the shit, and let's start again.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I've done
so
that. I hear you.
right, so we packed up the family. We moved 3 states. We moved south down to the cold country here in Tasmania. And then so we, not realizing it at the time, right? But we brought all our emotional and, relationship baggage with us. So 12 months into Tasmania, I've realized what I've actually done. And our marriage was all over but the shouting. And I'm not proud to admit I was a pretty abusive arsehole back then. And yeah, I honestly got into my head because I was doing this all on my own as well, that the world would be better off without me. And Sarah would be better off without me. The kids would be better off without me. Everybody would be. If you're listening to this right now and you're thinking that, that is a total bullshit lie, and please go reach out and talk to someone because that's what I ended up doing. But prior to that, I actually did try to kill myself. So I got to one night in November, back 11 years ago now. And yeah, I had the bottle of Jamison's in one hand, had the bottle of pain pills in the other, and just about to go do it. And my son walked in at 2 o'clock in the morning. He never used to do that. He always used to sleep really, really well. But he looked 2 years old, walked up and said, "Dada, what are you doing?" And that just stopped me in my tracks. I realized how selfish I was going to be in that moment, and basically just fell to my knees. And that's why I say love interrupted the story,
Yeah,
and it was at that moment that I made the commitment, the mantra, the declaration to do better, to serve better, to be a better husband, to be a better father, to be the people that are around me that I knew that I could be, but also that I was called to be, and my family deserved me to be, and all of that, right? So I took ownership.
mm,
And this is why I sort of talk about when I coach, it says let's create life above the line. Below the line is blame, excuse, and denial. And if you do that long enough, the devil gets inside your head and he can play those games with you to steal, kill, and destroy and distract. But taking above the line is ownership, accountability, and responsibility for our own actions. And this is that learning to love yourself conversation, warts and all. And so, in that declaration, in that moment, that shift, if you will, that Damascus Road moment. A week later, I was sort of actually not a week later, it was days later. I um, I just mentioned to this that what was happening to my business coach at the time, and she said, "Right, you need to come meet my friend Tim."
mhm,
And Tim's a local pastor at our church now. And so Tim met me where I was at. He didn't see the mess. He didn't see the damage and all that I was causing. The funny story is that Tim likes to describe me as, and I can see why, as the demoniac. You read in the Bible, right? So it's a bit of an
mm,
inside joke. But I was very much, a different person to what I am now. And the only thing that shifted that conversation is love. And I've just learned how to renew my mind and restore my heart and,
mhm,
start to step into that person that I'm called to be. And, so yes, I'm actually a disciple maker. I'm actually not a accredited pastor yet. I'm working towards that. We've started an online church, but it's just meeting people where they're at, just like happened for me at that scenario. And, I like to say to people that, yes, I'm a Christian or a disciple, is probably a better word. And I have a relationship with Christ, but I'm probably the most anti-religious person you'll ever meet in your life.
mhm,
Because I'm not for religion. I'm here for relationship. I'm here to meet people where they're at, just like Jesus met me where I was at. So in that moment where Tim sort of met me where I was at, and Jesus through Tim, Tim started to disciple me, and so we started doing Bible discovery. I said to Tim at this time, I said, I don't know who this Jesus fella is, but I've tried everything the world's had to offer, so I'm open. Teach
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
And so he started teaching me who this Jesus fella was, and very, very quickly, about 6 weeks into that journey, I've given my life to Christ. I've gotten baptized. 12 months into that journey, actually even less than that, I'm on a mission trip to India. I just saw miracle story after miracle story after miracle story. I just saw Jesus in action, relationship
Hmm.
in action, love in action, and how Hindu militants and people who used to kill and persecute Christians are now Christian themselves, like very much the Paul story. I saw that very, very evident in India. And then I decided after that, coming back, I did an internship with church. My wife and I did it together. We did a 2-year internship, learning how to be disciple makers and step up and serve in the church in that space. And so, and then, we went through that journey. The very beginning stages of my journey, I did get very righteous. I did get a little bit religious, and I realized, oh, that's
Happens.
that's
Yep. Yep.
straight away. That's not the way to go. I was the crazy guy who went door knocking around asking people if they like to receive prayer.
Hmm.
Um, Realized
Been
very, very
there.
quickly that was in your face. That was a bit too quick. So, and this is part of the marketing journey too, right? That direct
Hmm.
pitching stuff. And so I realized very, very quickly that no, that's not how we do it. We got to, that's not how Jesus did it. He did it through relationship. He did it through conversation. He did meet big people where we're at. And he did it through heart-to-heart connections. And so I've just, been a sales, been a marketing guy. I've learned how to transition that in everything that I do.
Hmm.
And that's that whole find your voice, elevate your voice, amplify your voice, blah, blah, blah. But it's it's just been human. Been human first, marketer second, been human first, sales second. It's been service first, sales second, like and that type of thing. But it's it's not even sales when you're doing it this way. Like it is, but it's contradictory to the way sales is portrayed.
It's
It's
a better way for
service.
sales to be done.
It's
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
And the sale happens itself when you do that.
Hmm.
And essentially, this whole conversation, I can sum it up with one word: leadership or discipleship. And you can't lead others, you can't guide others, you can't serve others if you can't do it for yourself. And you can't do that for yourself if you're not learning to serve someone higher than yourself.
Hmm. What I loved here, and I've been listening to the whole story, and there's certain things like I've connected with. Like I grew up in a super religious family. I have literally moved my family over 1,000 miles twice to get into a position to where I feel my family and we need to be successful and do what we're doing, and it's worked.
I
The
love
other
my
thing,
family
though, that
now. I'm
oh,
grateful that they're a few states
yeah,
away.
that's fine. Like I love my family too, but again, they live farther away. And it wasn't just them. For me, it was one of the growing up where I did, everyone had a mindset and a set that you could only do X. I was a country kid. You were supposed to work at a factory, do that. That was not my purpose. Yeah, I
Mm.
don't do good with boxes. I break boxes. The other thing you kept saying though that I love, and I want people to hear this is you kept looking for help. You had a business coach, your 2 year old helped you and you're humble enough to listen. You got a mentor with Tim to help kind of guide you into the steps that you're going. You weren't always like, I have to do it on my own. That's key in business, sales, relationship, life. And then the last thing, I just want to summarize this real quick. I got a question for you. Sales is service. Ziegler talked about that all the time. You know how I close CEOs of multi-billion and multi-million dollar companies? Because I talk to them, I listen to them, I solve their problem. I don't
Right,
sell them. In fact, I tell them, I'm not going to sell you. If this doesn't work, I'll get you someone else. And you know what
right.
happens? Like you said, that human connection. So we kind of got the foundation, but you guys have only gotten just a little piece of Jeff. Because like I've been following him for the last little bit. LA Tribune, you've been doing a bunch of stuff with them. You, 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 I love the humbleness of you, but you've actually been connected with people that would blow people away. One of them being the late, great Malcolm Warner Jr. from The Cosby Show. Other people in that circle. And I've never seen you use it as a flex. How did you get to the point to learn? Because I know a lot of people are going to ask this and look at you. how do you connect with high level people? I know how I do it, and we probably do it a little bit differently, but probably some of the same things. But how do you actually make those connections? Because I know your circle, and it's a pretty cool circle. Like people would pay money to get into the circle, and I know you don't have to pay money because the door was open. So how did you even start getting into that?
Yeah, powerful question. And to be honest, I've still got to pinch myself. Like, I still ask myself, how did I get into that? I totally understand that God's opening doors for me, and it's hopefully higher power has guided me into the right place. But it's faith plus action equals the miracle, right? There's
Yep.
our part
Yep.
too. And so you've got to be saying, God, use me in that space, but then go do what he asks you to do, right? A lot of
Yep.
people sit there and they pray and they pray and they pray for this stuff, but then they don't go do the work. So
Yeah.
I really want to, start there with that conversation because that is something that and I'm not a prideful person, but I do take pride, and I think it's a different conversation altogether. I take pride in the work that I put in
Yep.
uh,
You
in
could.
that space because it's, like not many people can outwork me in this space because of I realize what it takes to show up, to be present. But this is that above the line culture, right? That's that ownership, accountability, and responsibility, and being a person of integrity first and foremost. So, first off, you got to get clarity on your values and your strengths and your weaknesses. You can't go knock on these doors if you don't have posture
Hmm.
and you don't have confidence, you don't have passion in that space. So I've seen a lot of people try and knock on these doors, but it's always been, first off, and here's the key point, it's always been for their agenda.
Hmm. Hmm.
And rather of just saying, how can I help? So that's how this whole conversation started. It was good old fashioned networking. And so I can actually take you right back about probably 7 generations. I connected with a fellow by the name of Ty Shane. Ty Shane introduced me to another conversation of Tom Simmons. And every conversation, I've just built relationship, I've just built connection, and so I got introduced to Tom Simmons, who started these AI summits about 2 years ago, and that was very much sort of my first introduction into the American marketplace and these virtual summits and been on that space. And so it's actually been a very fast trajectory if you look at it, but reflecting back. So Tom introduced me to Karen Hall, then introduced me to Michael Silvers, and then they brought me into the Los Angeles Tribune network through that. Helped me launch my podcast, the Laptop Lifestyle Dad Show, which now we just cracked over 45 episodes. Um, and so, in that whole journey, I've just been connecting. I've just been building relationships. But the question I keep reaching out to him is, I go out to, Karen. I've reached out to Michael, and who is now my business partner. And Michael's the vice president of the Los Angeles Tribune, who then
Hmm.
introduced me to Mary Glorifield. Mary Glorifield is Tony Robbins's ex former VP for 18 years. She's actually the person who put Tony on stage and did all the works behind the scenes. Through that relationship, I'm now working with Joseph McClendon, who's Tony Robbins' peak performance coach. Like if you've seen Tony Robbins, you've seen Joseph in any of the
Hmm.
UPW, which I'm now working with Natasha Graziano in that space. So, and I've been have the privilege to do tech with Gene Simmons from Kiss and a few other pretty big prominent names. I was actually just talking to a fellow who actually coaches Tiger Woods, Lance Armstrong, and Bono from U2. And yeah, I used to, until recently, and rest in peace, but I was working with Joseph and Malcolm Jamal Warner from the Cosby Show, on a project until he tragically lost his life to a drowning accident, saving his daughter.
Hmm.
But I've started to, be in a position in power of proximity to working with some of the top 1% of the 1% of the 1% in the entertainment and the media and the personal development space. And it's very much a pinch me moment, but that whole premise, that whole conversation just comes from one question. How can I help?
Hmm.
Quite
And you
simple,
live
right?
that. Yeah.
Yeah, just live that. And how could I help? They go, well, you do this and this and get it done. Let your
Hmm.
yes be yes and your no be a no. And I've actually reflected over the last 10 years, and I've had mentors, and I've they've mentored me, and then I've been of service, and I've gone, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? And then that mentorship, and this has actually happened several times when I reflect, that mentorship turns into a partnership, and you're running by side. And just what's happening now in this last month, there's exponential growth of that conversation. I've pretty much started a boutique digital marketing agency overnight with my mate Dave,
Hmm.
just because
Love
we've
Dave.
been we've been of service. But here's the thing, right? In that whole conversation, I've never really had my money hand out and said, "Okay, pay me." I've just been, how can I help? Not expecting anything in return, and now the floodgates are opening up. Now the
Hmm.
network's opening up. Now the conversations, the relationships are opening up. And that's that, I think that flipped over table head, scenario. Everybody's got their hand out expecting something in return, where I've just shown up, I've just been of service. I've just said, put me in, coach. Let's play the
Hmm.
game full out, and been of service and ask how I help. And I've built on that relationship. I've built on that trust, and I've built on that connection. And now I don't even need to ask how I can help, because they all come to me because I know that they can get the service that they're after. And now you've got to meet my mate Jeff. You've got, basically Michael and I are now business partners. So, business partners with, Michael Silvers, who was Steve Harker, I can't remember, my dyslexia gets in the way. Steve Harvecker's right-hand man, who built Million Dollar Mindset with that coaching company there for the 20 odd years that he was with him. He
Hmm.
was with Chris Howard before that. So, I'm working with, legacy titans in the personal development entertainment space, and they're coming to me, and it's like I'm on daily conversations with Michael, Joseph, Mary, and it sounds like a biblical story, right?
Yeah, it did
But
for a second. I was waiting
but
for you to say Jesus too, but I know you talk to Jesus every day too, so we're good.
of course he's amongst it all. You know what I mean? It
No,
really is a pinch me moment, but it's
yeah.
quite surreal how this has happened. But I just reflect on that.
Yeah, but it's not. I understand the pinch me moment because we never look at our gifts and our talents and what God's empowered us with as something special compared to what it really is. Like I thought about this. I'm like, how did I meet you? When you mentioned Ty, I met you and Ty on my friend Philip Sessions. He was doing a little video thing, and that was probably one of the worst virtual things that I did because my camera died on my thing. I had to go to my daughter's bedroom, use her computer with her bunk bed behind me, and
Yeah, I
just
remember that
spitfire because I couldn't
conversation.
get my notes or anything. But you and I became friends. And then you know
Yeah,
what else happened? That introduced me to Jonathan Mass and a bunch of other people. And what I think happens is this: when you're doing the right thing, when your intention is pure, when you're trying to help people, doors open up for you that people can't pay millions to get into because they're not
yeah,
qualified, because people at that level don't care about money. They care about integrity and what you can do to
Luther.
help them, and then they'll reciprocate. That's something that I just want people to understand. It's not about paying to play. So you hear people
Yeah.
say pay to play, and I'm not against investing. I do coaches and stuff. Don't hear that. But what I'm saying is it's not about going to the event and I'm going to pay 20,000 to get a picture with Tony Robbins, but I don't have a relationship. No, I'd rather get on a call with Jeff, get connected to Michael, or get connected to someone else that where I can establish a relationship. Because guess what? Now we can impact together. Not I just have a little badge with a picture with me with some dude that will never remember me. No, I love
Yeah.
that. I was just thinking that through in my head, all the different things. But you have skill, brother. You don't have just how am I here? Those gifts and callings were in you. What happened was when you raised your hand and you said something else. And I want to harp on this a little bit because we have all the manifestation people. You just manifest, you just sit there, you just believe it. Biblically, faith without works is dead. Non-biblically, if you don't put action, you're not going to get anything. Every action has the opposite and equal reaction. It's a principle. You can't
Yeah.
just pray about it or just manifest it or whatever term you're trying to use without any action, because you're not going to get anywhere. But when you take massive action, more and more doors open. So it's not, I guess in my head here, because I talk to a lot of high achievers and none of them feel like they're good enough. None of them
Mm.
feel like they have the edge. They don't understand why, but your secret is the fact that you're not trying to produce you. You're trying to bring passion, purpose, plan into the world, whether it's through
Yeah.
your faith like you do or the other. So I just commend you for that. But it's funny to see that in almost everyone
I
I
think
talk to.
on that, I just want to summarize that a little bit too, because I reflect like it seems to be a quite an awesome vantage point here right now, and just looking back. And I thank you for this conversation. It's got me to really reflect. But the thing that is coming up from here in my heart that I think that the audience needs to hear is the old Jeff was all about performance. Yeah, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. I'm cool, that sort of thing. It's all about performance. And to be honest, it was all superficial performance, and that's what, you do see a lot here on in the world is a lot of people trying to, I hate the saying and it detests me, but this is why I realize it does now, this whole fake it till you make it conversation.
Yeah.
It's a load of freaking bullshit.
Yep.
But
100%.
when you can get out of that performance mode, when you can get out of that fake until you make it mode, and then the flip side to that conversation is be it till you become it. It's a totally different conversation. But this is that head out, that's getting out of your head, get into your heart, and show up and fail forward fast. Get
Hmm.
out of perfection mode and just do it messy, do it fast, do it progressive, and learn as you go conversation and build on that. But here's once again, it's quite clear to me at this vantage point. Here's the premise to it all: is you've got to live life above the line. And a lot of people, and myself included back then, when shit didn't work, okay, it wasn't my fault. Blame. Oh, no, I didn't do this. Excuse. No, 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 can't be that. Denial. Right? So that's that bed conversation versus, hey, Joe, shit's happened. This is what's going on. I'm taking full ownership of the situation. Just want to let you know I've got it covered. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. That's
Hmm.
ownership. Hey Joe, we've set this target. We haven't really achieved the target, but we're 80% there. What we're going to do is we're just going to pivot and adjust, and we're going to make every effort to get there next month. That's accountability,
Hmm.
and responsibility, right? So that's, you're picking up your oar, you're rowing down the stream, and you're doing your absolute best, but you're doing it in a way that you're showing up. And here's the premise of this whole conversation is, for me back then, it was a lack of character.
Hmm.
It was not, it wasn't necessarily character deficiency. The character just wasn't formed yet. And I had to go through my trial by fire, if you will. I had to go through my dark forest season, if you will, to come out of that and really go, right, the character's always there, the thing's always there, the base is there. But in that iron sharpens iron, that, you know, the rock chipping out of the statue of Michelangelo out of the big rock, in those trials, in those tribulations, God has chipped away at me. And now I'm starting to step into that person that he was always calling me to be, and
Hmm.
the person he's created me to be. But once again, that come back to love. And in that love, and in that restoring, and in that renewing, the character has been built up, and I see too many people, especially online, I'm sure you do too as well, too many people just really shouting at each other and fighting at each other. And what I could see is just it's a lack of character.
Hmm.
I feel like our problems in our own world are not external, they're all internal, and that requires you to go take ownership, accountability, responsibility, and develop your character. And when you can do that, and then you can go and serve, not be transactional, really just go serve, then doors open for you left, right, and center, because those people of character who have done the hard yards to get where they are, they recognize the work that you've done. I
Hmm.
actually got on a business meeting with one of these high influential, high potential clients the other day, and he said, Jeff, you wouldn't have even gotten the door if I didn't even know that your nose was a little bit crooked, you had a few scars to show, and like you've been through the battles, been through the
Hmm.
wars. You would not even got the door if I did not know that.
Yep.
You know, and so there's something in that, right? And then it's not going to say that, those who are just getting started, please don't quit. Don't hear me on that. You've got to go through it
Hmm.
to get to that point. But at the top here, at this higher sort of echelon point, you've got to lead with vulnerability, lead with your truth, lead with your transparency, lead with your character to even knock on these doors and have them open for you.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's the hero's journey that everyone has to go on,
Yes.
especially if you're trying to do and achieve anything. And the thing I just keep hearing the thread: accountability, authenticity, lead with heart, lead with helping people, and it will work out. And understand that you're going to be a hero and a villain in someone's world, and you need to be okay with it because that's not your decision to make. That's their reflection back. And sometimes it's just you're doing something that they should do, so now you're the villain, or you're doing something that they should do, so now you're the hero. You're showing them the path. It's just learning to do that, which is hard because we always want people to love us, but I'm not for everyone, you're not for everyone. But if we collectively do what we need, we're for the people we need to affect.
Right, 100%. It's called magnetic attraction, right? We're either magnetic or we're repelling. And what you just said there, it's something that basically sums it up. Detachment, like, most of us who get into this game, we start, and it's not necessarily intentional being transactional, but it comes that transactional conversation comes from a space of attachment. It comes from a space of desperation, lack,
Mm-hmm.
that type of conversation. Oh shit, I got to pay the bills today, blah, 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 versus coming from a space of gratitude, space of like love and all that sort of thing. But so the best way I can think of is coming up here in my head now is detachment, right? I'm not attached to the result, but I
Right.
am attached to something. You've got to be attached to something, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're not attached to something, you're flapping in the wind, right? You haven't got roots. So I'm not attached to the transactional results of what happens, but what I am attached to is legacy, is impact, is mission, is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And as something once I say, if you're not attached to something that's bigger than yourself, that's driving you to do, you won't do the work, right? You'll give up. But if you're attached to the wrong thing, then you operate from the wrong energy. And this whole conversation is energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whatever your beliefs are, New Age, Christianity, whatever, right? The common thread through that whole thing. And for me, it's very clear that what the Bible says. It's very clear that we need to be in relationship with Jesus. It's very clear in that space. But I also want to come into this with a respect conversation. At the end of the day, the one thing that we're all talking about is energy,
Mm-hmm.
is that love energy, that love vibration. And it's our job as leaders, as influencers. John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It's our job in that space to raise the vibration. It's our responsibility. So, to be the thermostat, not the thermometer of the conversation, to every conversation that we come into, and this is that ownership part of it, to look at, okay, how can I how can I plant a seed of hope, light, joy, love into your life? So then you go do whatever you got to do with that seed. I'm not attached to you doing whatever you need to do with that seed, but it's my responsibility to be a person in your life to raise the vibration.
Mhm. No, I love that. I love because this is the thing that, and it's really how I win in sales, business, and life. And I only bring it up because people are always asking me, because I'm a top closer, how do you do this? And I'm
Mm.
detached from the outcome. I know
Yeah,
I can only control my inputs. That means I can only control my integrity, how I treat
yeah,
the client, what solution I bring, what I'm bringing to the table, what energy I'm bringing. And then the right people are going to buy. The people that aren't going to buy don't need to buy because they're not supposed to buy. And then guess what? If you do that, maybe Jeff says no to me on something here, but I introduced, or and then but he introduces me to Tim and Fred and Sally, and all of a sudden now I've got way more ideal client, right person, my energy, who I'm supposed to be, my passion, purpose, plan can affect where I wasn't going to affect Jeff. It's not our job, just like when we talk about Christianity, it's not our job to save people. It's our job to share the message. Same thing
yeah,
with your business, same thing with your life. You have to share the message and the right people will come in. I think
correct.
they smell sales breath. I call it sales breath or commissions breath when you're so desperate about it because you put yourself into a box. So I want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about this because there's too many people that do this. They say burn the ships, go all in, and they take that out of context. I'm going to give you
Go
super
go for
short
the no,
context.
right? Go for
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
go for the no.
Well, I go for the no, but that's me. Burned the ships. You know why he burned the ships? He screwed his guys because if he went back to Havana, Cortez was dead. They said, you go back to Havana, you're dead. It was his least risky option, more risky for his men. So that's actually way out of context. Better is to have plan, preparation, go in, maybe do a hybrid, maybe start out small and build so you can grow and start getting those scars. But what are your thoughts on that? When someone comes and goes, "Hey, I want to start a business. I want to do all this stuff," but they haven't gotten into any space yet. What are your thoughts on it? And we can think differently. I'm totally cool with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. And look, the whole go for your no conversation, it's got to be coming out of the right context. Yeah, and so like I see too many people burning and churning, and essentially I get a little bit pissed off with this whole conversation, go for the no, because it sets people up for failure. But professionals like you and I can go for the no, right?
Mhm.
Because we've got that, we understand the game, we understand the rules, we understand that we're not attached to it all. So yeah, we do go for the no. But if you're just stepping into this conversation, what I've seen time and time and time again is that whole go for the no attitude. If you're immature in that space, you're green in that space, what it does, it just basically pisses people off and burns and churns people. And so that's what I want to open up this conversation here in that space. So this is what I call versus sales versus direct pitching, and so sales with service, sales with relationships, sales with solution focused, like there's the right time to put the right product in front of the right people at the right time. You
Mhm.
know, you can only do that through intimacy, right? Into me see. You can only do that through relationship. You can only do that through qualification. You can only do that through discovery. So how can I put the right product in front of the right person at the right time? Well, I've got to learn how to ask powerful questions.
Mhm.
I've got to learn how to qualify people. I've got to learn how to do the relationship and discovery piece. A really awesome acronym that I use to help me to do this is called the GROW principle. I get clear on what your goals are, I get clear on what your reality is, I get clear on what your options are and your opportunities are, and then I invite you to come check it out for yourself to move forward. So goals, reality, opportunities, way forward. Right. So, but I don't move forward in any of those until I'm clear on those spaces. And
Mhm.
so the only way that you can get clear on that is to go fail forward, is to go do it, make mistakes, and
Yeah.
failure is not failure, it's just feedback,
Uh-huh.
and I love the story that that if the Wright brothers gave up, on their first attempt, on their first failure, we wouldn't have flight. If Thomas Edison gave up on his first attempt, that we wouldn't have light and electricity like we do today. Right. So failure is not failure. Failure is feedback. It's just
Mhm.
information. It's just data. And it's data that comes back. Okay, that didn't work. What do I need to do? Okay, the goal is I've got to get clear on the goals. Then I can move to, the reality. So it's learning how to ask powerful questions. And this is why I teach everybody that I come into is go have 500 conversations as fast as possible,
Mhm.
but following through that formula, right? So you learn to your wisdom and your experience helps you to discern when is the right time to move forward, when is the right time to ask the questions to move forward, yada yada yada. So yeah, go for the no, but go through the no with that context, with that
Mhm.
premise.
Yeah, it's
Uh
not turning and burning them. It's more
yeah,
of helping and learning and growing, and you're going to get objections. Like in my old sales
right.
days, they said you have to get bloodied. I like baseball, so I use baseball terms.
Yeah,
If you hit 300% in baseball, you're a Hall of Famer. That
yeah,
means you lost and missed 7 times out of 10, but
right.
you hit 3 times out of 10, you're a Hall of Famer. The problem is that we watch TV shows and movies and stuff, and they have this great script that was
Hollywood.
written for them. That's not true. It's BS. And then like even the Wolf of Wall Street, they're like, "Oh, this is great," and then he tries to teach it, but teach it ethically. Bro, the guy went to jail because he was mentally manipulating people. Don't
Right.
do that crap. Serve, love, give, help, you win. It's so much better, but you definitely have to get up to bat. You have to get uncomfortable with asking the questions. I think that's something people are afraid of.
Yeah. Look, I cut my teeth in sales on selling timeshare to people. And so I realized very, very quickly what I was doing and locking people into these lifetime contracts. And 6 months into that, I bailed because I couldn't
Yep,
manipulate people.
yep.
I just
I'm with
couldn't
you.
do it. But I learned how to manipulate people very, very early on. And so it's NLP and sales, it could be used for the wrong reasons. Just
Hmm.
like AI can be used for the wrong reasons, a gun can be used for the wrong reasons, right? They're just tools.
Hmm.
And it's the heart and the agenda behind them that either brings light or evil into the conversation. But you're coming back to your whole burn the ships conversation. I've done that. And has it served me? Not really. I'm of the opinion of, you know, bless and release people and not sort of burn people. Because the thing at the end of the day, you just never know who's going to help you down the road.
Hmm.
And so if that is the premise of the conversations, then what shifts here is sales is not the important thing of the conversation. Sales is just a result, just like money is just a result.
Hmm.
It's a measurement, if you will. What becomes the most important part of this conversation then is if you shift your mindset and shift your framework, it's relationships.
Hmm.
It's your network, right? And I don't think people realize that that saying is your network is your net worth.
Hmm.
Until you really get to this space in the game where you go, the light bulb goes on, right? Because too many people go into this journey early on and burn and churn and go for the no for the wrong reasons. But at the same time, you know, those of us who have got grit and determination and need to embrace the suck and figure it out, realize that that's part of the journey as well. So yeah, there will be people that you will, you know, burn the ships with in that space because your naivety and your
Hmm.
ignorance and in that space didn't really realize it at the time and that immaturity of it, right? But the mature person will keep their focus on the prize, keep their focus on the mission. And Sarah likes to describe Jeff as a jet boat. Sometimes Jeff's just like a jet boat, and sometimes Sarah's got to come behind the wake and behind the jet boat and clean up the mess, sort of thing. So that's very much it, right?
Yeah.
I get really laser focused on things, and I have burnt the ships in the past in the port, not necessarily intentionally,
Hmm.
but at the same time, I've never regretted what I've done. It's it's learning not to be attached to the mess.
Hmm.
It's
Well, but
uh
you,
it's
you,
it's
you,
learning.
yeah.
Here's the thing. It's learning to forgive yourself and learning to forgive others and giving permission for others to forgive you.
Mhm. No, I love that. That was powerful because I think a lot of times people hold on to things and that's what holds
Mm,
them back. They won't step out
right?
into what they need to do next because, well, Joe
Yeah,
screwed me 18 years ago.
yeah, right. So yeah, that sums up this whole conversation. It's learning to forgive, and that's pretty much what I have been doing as last 10 years in this as a student in this space. Learning to love, and learning to love is learning to forgive. But see, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But the same is true if you don't forgive yourself, you're drinking the same poison expecting yourself to die.
Mhm.
And when I look back at, my life now and where it was, I was in so much hurt from a space of so much unforgiveness.
Mhm. Mm. So let's unpack that while we start to land this plane because I think a lot of people, especially in this space, have a wound. They've gone through traumatic event. They have a chip on their shoulder. They definitely are either, most of them are either dyslexic or ADHD, or they think outside the box. And
Hmm.
then they have a high IQ or a high EQ or both. That's kind of like a pattern that I've seen. Justin Breen told me to begin with, so I'm not taking credit for something I didn't. But like once he said that, it
I
just
can see
clicked in
that.
my head. But how do you, from your perspective, how do you start to forgive people that hurt you? Because a lot of people have an issue with this. Like there's certain people, like, and I've literally gone to the point where there's certain things I've wrote a letter and burnt it, only not like in some woo way, but just to, I needed to write it out. I guess it was woo. I don't care. I needed to write it out, all the stuff, and then just release it. And the burning, I like fire, so that might have helped. That help. But how do you help people, or how do you, maybe it's not even something you help, but how do people even start to forgive when they've been hurt? Because everyone's been hurt. None of us get out here without getting hurt.
And I'm not perfect at this by any means. And there's still, when I reflect of, I can probably come up with a few stories that I probably haven't processed forgiveness yet. Forgiveness is a
Mhm.
process,
Yeah.
and forgiveness is a daily choice. And I say to people, the only reason that Sarah and I are married 15 years later is because we've learnt the art of forgiving each other. And by means, like, we still yell and scream at each other, we still have fights with each other, and our boys have been, they've probably been blessed and cursed at the same time. They've seen mum and dad like do everything out. And there's nothing, one of our core values is transparency. You live life in the light because we're only as
Hmm.
sick as our sickness, right? We don't live in the dark. So, yeah, look, we're emotional creatures. And I think that's where it starts, is realizing that forgiveness is a process in a journey, but you got to understand the awareness of the emotions that we go through. One of my favorite sayings is we're all walking, talking skin bags full of human emotion.
Hmm.
The best part about this business is the people, and the worst part about this business is the people,
The people.
right? So it's learning that, okay, we don't always operate out of intelligence. We're most of the time very reactive people and we operate out of emotion. So it's starting there and understanding the way the brain processes decisions, like reading books like, Simon Sinek's Start With Why, working with Joseph McClendon, who's probably the top neuropsychology person in the world, working with some being blessed in those spaces, understanding the way that the brain and the human process, we go through our emotions, we go through our decision making and all of that sort of thing. So it starts with an awareness and education in that. As well, that's one of the things that's definitely helped. And I still only feel like I'm scratching the surface, the tip of the iceberg of this conversation, but
Hmm.
it's something that I'm very fascinated with, and almost to the point of obsession,
Hmm.
and learning how to go through this forgiveness. But if I had to bring it back to one thing that has helped me to even start this conversation, I'm only 10 years into it. But if I had to bring in one thing, it was discipleship. It's learning to lead. And I specifically say discipleship, not coming to faith, not Christianity, because there are a lot of people in the church who believe in Christ, but I wouldn't call them disciples.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people who believe in Jesus and do nothing about it, but guess what? So does the devil. The devil believes in Jesus. He has to. Does he follow him? No. And I truly believe that this is the core crux of one of the toxic things that are in a problem in our church today. When I say church, I say Western world, global church.
Hmm.
And the actual stats prove that, the model is broken, it's wrong, it's not even designed to disciple. It's actually, if the Great Commandment and the Great Commission that you read in the Bible, right, it's very, very clear and it's black and white in what we're called to do. And one of the things that we're called to do is go make disciples who make other disciples, who teach Jesus and obey their ways, obey his ways. And if you look at the stats from the 1980s to today, we're only 2% effective at that.
Hmm.
So there's fundamentally something broken in that. And so the answer to this is what I can clearly see is discipleship. And so coming back to your original question, how do we forgive and how do we learn to forgive? Well, learning to love yourself, learning to love Jesus, and learning to love your neighbors is part of that process. If we're called to follow Jesus, if we're called to follow his ways and obey his commands, well, we're called to be people of forgiveness.
Hmm.
We're called to be people of light and joy and love. And here's the thing, right? You can't forgive others if you can't forgive yourself. You
Hmm.
can't love others if you don't love yourself. And the way that we learn how to do both is by learning how to love something bigger than ourselves, i.e., Jesus. So the answer to this whole equation is ultimately learning to be a disciple of Jesus, learning to love, learning to follow Jesus.
Hmm. And I want to caveat even on top of that, because I think a lot of times, especially in the Western church, they have how do I put this? I'm just going to say it. They have a run to Daddy Jesus to get my thing, not be a disciple of Jesus. And I think that's something that definitely needs to be said because you can't pimp out God. Anyone that says if you give something that God has to do anything for you, that doesn't work, with the exception of
And I'm glad that you
salvation.
said that.
Yeah. No, so
I'm glad.
I agree 100% with you on that. And I think the world needs more of the real Jesus and who he was and what he did. Like I've been reading Mark lately. Like I haven't been listening to preachers or anything. I've just been reading Mark. I'm like, I want to actually hear what did Jesus actually do? Not what did Tim tell me he did or Fred or Sally or Mary. What did the Bible say he actually did? And you know what's funny? The more I read it, the more I like Jesus and the less I like church people. I know that sounds mean, but it's just because of the
Right.
dichotomy I'm seeing, and it's probably me. It is 100% me. We're going back to 100% ownership. It's me going through challenging my faith, challenging my belief
Yeah,
systems because it has to be
true,
locked
man.
in for what I believe.
Yeah,
But I'm good with it. Like literally,
yeah,
I haven't released a podcast yet, but I had a guy on and we kind of debated and went deep on is Jesus real? And he doesn't believe Jesus is real, which I will listen to other people's opinions. I don't have a problem with that. Like
oof.
I believe Jesus is real. For me, yes, it's 100%. But I understood some of his points and theories because of the fact of where his lens was and what it was done. And maybe it was just for me to get that conversation going with him again. I
Yeah,
think we need to have those conversations like we're having, not be stuck in four walls
100%.
singing to each other.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna challenge it a little bit here as well, if that's okay. We're either green and growing or we're ripe and rotten. So
Mhm.
the whole discipleship journey is growth, and in that conversation is transformation,
Yep.
right? So the goal of discipleship, if we're gonna unpack this, the goal of discipleship is to be like Jesus, is to become more like Christ every day. So, in that conversation, it clearly says that we are meant to be gathering together in church. Now, I believe that the Western world's view of church is totally warped, totally wrong.
Mhm.
And so I understand your statement that you're good, that you don't need to go to church. You're doing what you
Yeah.
need to do between you
Well,
and
let me
Jesus.
clarify. I do go to church. Stop.
Yeah.
I just have not been going as much because I keep going and trying different ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not, I'm very much on authenticity. And if I
Yeah,
don't feel
yeah.
it's authentic, I can't.
Yeah, so let me clarify and just go a little bit deeper here with you. I totally hear that and I totally get that. I'm exactly the same as that. And so where I was going with that is, the Western world's church is, the viewpoint and the way that it's been conditioned is a little bit warped, right? People go to church to get something, right? They
Mhm.
go to church to be to receive something, to entertain, to be informed, to blah blah blah. Essentially, people go, I'm very blunt here for a second. This is just my viewpoint and just my opinion, but I see people just go to church just to tick a box,
100%.
right? And that's hypocritical, absolutely hypocritical. That's what Jesus stood against. He called the Pharisees out for pride. Jesus forgave a lot of sins. Forgave adultery, he forgave murder, he forgave rape, even blah, 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 right? The one thing he did not forgive is pride.
Mhm.
It's pride. So, and I've been a very prideful person. I've been doing it, and I still am sometimes. And so this is the journey that I'm on. But see, when we take this whole I'm a Christian out of the conversation and just say I'm a disciple in the conversation, well, discipleship requires you to mature. It requires you to grow. It requires you to transform. See, it's a whole different conversation. I'm not just going to a box just to tick it, just to say I belong to a club, us versus them bullshit.
Mhm.
I'm in a space where it's focused on discipleship and I'm really learning to obey Jesus' commands. And it's quite clearly simple. There's only really one command that we need to obey, and that's to love God, to love ourselves, and to love our neighbors. Full
Mhm.
stop. Everything comes back to the great commandment, the great commission, and then go teach others to go do the same thing, right? So that's the Jesus I'm following. That's the play I'm playing.
Mhm.
And every other disciple that I see is playing the same game in that with the same one mind, one heart, one body, one spirit conversation. And that is the true north to the conversation. Now, here's the conversation now. If that's the equation, then am I not required to truly love my brothers and sisters? Am I not required to go to church, not to get, but to give, to be a testimony, to be a witness? to share in with my brothers and sisters in Christ in what I see as that's the beautiful picture of how church is really meant to be. And
Hmm.
the only description and the blueprint that I see in the whole of the entire Bible as church is meant to be is in Acts 2:47. They met together, they gathered together, they did life together, they did discipleship together. I'm very badly paraphrasing right now, but they broke bread together. They didn't go there to get, they went there to give. It was out of generosity. It was the reason why they gathered together. See, our Western world church is it's all designed to essentially get bums on seats to entertain the masses, to bring them into a building. That's not church. You know, when you hear the saying, where two or more are gathered, you will find Jesus. Yeah, correct. When two or more disciples are gathered, you will
Right.
find Jesus. So this whole equation comes back to discipleship. So, and discipleship, and I bring it back, requires us to transform, requires us to be green and growing, requires us to be a person of love and maturity. And maturity can only happen in participation.
Hmm.
So then, therefore, we are called to gather as a body of Christ, as a body of disciples in, i.e., church. This is why we've started our online church, because we wanted to challenge the status quo, if you will. And it's been some hard breaking ground here because we're dealing with some very religious, that the persecution that we've actually received for starting our online church has not been from outside the secular world, it's been from inside the church. The
Hmm.
the holy rollers, the religious. We did an
Yeah, they
online
see it as a
baptism.
threat. Yeah.
We did an online baptism. Who does an online baptism? I was here in Tasmania, my friend was in Queensland,
Hmm.
and we hosted an online baptism via Zoom. We ticked all the boxes. It was a public declaration. It was a full immersion saturation. It was his will.
Yep.
We simplified it and we achieved
Hmm.
an online baptism through Zoom here. So I used to believe in a way that you did too, Joe, that I don't need to go to church, or I don't, church is not, necessarily, giving me something, right? And, or I don't want to go to church because I can't bring myself to there because there's so many inauthentic people there. All of those sort of things. But if you bring that conversation, then you really bring it back to its basis. That was about me trying to get something from church
Hmm.
rather
Well,
than
let me,
me
yeah,
rather than
let
me
me ask
going in
you.
and say, right, I need to be there to give something and challenge something and help others to grow something.
No, and I get that. So, and let me clarify a little bit here because, like, here's the craziest thing I see in my life. And I've been in a bunch of different churches, from Pentecostals to Baptist to non-denomination to you name it. I've probably been in one of those church circles, served for years, done all the things. And some of the time my heart was right with it, and some of the times the teaching was wrong, and I thought this is what I was supposed to do. Once I stepped away from that and actually challenged my belief and figured out what I wanted and what I actually really needed from, like, that was real, genuine to me. Now I have more friends online that I talk about God, Christ, the Bible. You're one of them. I like Chad Potts, Jim Burgoon. Those are just some of them that you would know.
Wouldn't you
Eric
say that you're in
Allen.
church already?
That's where I would say I would actually be more in church because we're actually having
Right.
conversations. A
And
guy I
this is my
mentored
point.
named Chris from
Yeah,
my
yeah.
work, me and him talk about God all the time, but in a
Yeah.
discipleship platform. What I'm meaning is the four walls, you go there, you have to do that. That to
Exactly. And
me
that's
has
not
never
church.
been church.
No,
Like,
it's
they met
not.
from
It's
house to
not.
house, then they went and made disciples. That's way different than in the four walls. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm
Right.
not
Yeah, yeah,
against
yeah.
the body of Christ,
100%.
and my church really is online. Like, the people I talk to is online, and some of them you would be like, are they really? But then when you actually dig in, they know Jesus way more than some of these people that are up there
100%,
preaching
right?
all day long. Yeah,
And,
I just
and,
wanted to
and I
clarify
know
that.
that.
I'm not against church, the real church. I'm against fake religion. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have to clarify because I
Amen.
can't stand that.
Amen. And I'm totally on the same page with you on that. And I'm glad we got there in the end. But yeah, look, and that is exactly the conversation that we need to be having around this whole thing is what is church? There are too many people out there that think church is what it's portrayed to be, but that's not church. What we're describing right now, us here, two
Mhm.
disciples of Christ meeting together, this is church.
Yep.
And, if you read the stories of Jesus, you read the stories of Paul, you read the stories of all of the apostles, and the disciples and all that sort of thing in the New Testament. And what I see is that church is moving. It's never stagnant, and it's always moving, and it's always growing. If Paul, here's the conversation, and here's the question, is if Paul just stayed where he was and tried to focus on converting just Jerusalem in its own, or Judea in its own, and didn't go to Asia, didn't go to Rome, would we
Mhm,
have church today as it is? No, of course not.
mhm,
So that's the thing, right? And I've wrestled with this conversation myself, and I've doubted it, I've challenged it, and I've come to my own conviction on this, that every day I show up online, I'm showing up to serve God because I'm in church.
mhm,
The where I show up in the Los Angeles Tribune, where I show up in the Los Angeles in the Laptop Lifestyle Dads community, or the Hero Makers community that we've just rebranded to, where I've shown up in any of those areas, that is i.e., the marketplace.
mhm,
You look at the way where Jesus went and did church, right? He went to the marketplace
mhm,
and he met people where they're at. And then they met up in the households and the gathering in safe places to do the discipleship journey.
mhm. Yeah,
So
because you
that's
have to learn, you have to grow, you have to iron
right.
sharpens iron. And the funny thing, this is the thing I always laugh about, because whatever group, and I don't care, they're like, Jesus loves everybody but X. And then if I go and read the Bible, I'm like, he hung out with prostitutes, he hung out with the mafia of the day, he hung out with the downtrodden, he hung out with the outcasts. Not that he didn't love everyone, but he literally went to where everyone said these people are not worth it and said, no, they're worth it. And I think that if the church could flip on its head and change what it's doing, and I'm talking about the body of Christ at this point, instead of trying to be in our four walls or it's
Yeah, yeah,
only
yeah.
white Anglo-Saxon Christians or black Christians, or because the church is the most segregated
Oh
group
yeah,
out there, which is
yeah,
unreal to me. Like
yeah.
I'm like, you guys are stupid. Like I'll say it,
So
like
many
you
people,
you're
so many people are going to
stupid.
get so many people are going to get a rude shock when they go to heaven.
Yeah. Oh,
Like
I'm good with that. Yeah.
but some people are going to get a rude shock because they've only ever hung around their own type of people.
Hmm.
And heaven's going to be full of every tongues, every color, every race,
Hmm.
every culture, because God is diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a post there, and I know that we're going way over time here, but this is a really interesting conversation. So thank you for keep going. I saw a post there the other day about what was it? Equality and inclusion and diversity. So yeah, diversity, equality, and inclusion.
Hmm.
So DEI, there's a statement that gets thrown around, right? Especially in the political scene, left versus right. Especially in the left, they scream out they want more DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The funny thing is, if we all just focused on discipleship, we all just focused on learning to love ourselves, learning to love something bigger than ourselves, learning to love others, we would have DEI.
True DEI, not
True
fake
DEI,
DEI that gets reversed, and now you're not
right?
being judged by your value, but by something you don't control. Yeah.
Right? We'd
Yeah.
have it, would we not? We would have it.
Hmm.
That's what I see
We would.
heaven as.
Hmm. Yeah. God
So,
doesn't have, God doesn't pick that regard. Yeah, you get there, you're there. It's not, oh, Joe gets a better spot than Jeff because I'm American and you're Australian. I'm using a stupid thing that does not matter in heaven's eyes at all. Like, or Fred is from Zimbabwe, so he only gets the third mansion and Jeff gets five because he's from Australia. It doesn't work that way. And I'm using stupid extremes on purpose of just stuff you're like, that doesn't make sense. But then people will be like, oh, well, they were born on the wrong side of the track or they don't look like me. Well, you know what's really weird? Everyone wants best things for their family. They want to live a life that they love. They want their family taken care of, and they want to have the ability to pursue their passion, purpose, and plan. It's that simple. So it does go back to what you said: love the Lord your God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, and you fulfill the law and the commandments. That's what Jesus said. If you do that, that's what Jesus said. I don't care, and don't take this wrong. I don't care if Paul says something different. I don't care if Moses says something different. If we're disciples of Jesus, That's
Oh,
what he
we can have a
said.
whole other conversation around that.
Well,
We can have a whole.
we can do a different one on that. And no, I'm not a Gnostic. I have
Yeah, yeah,
I am the weird guy that will watch different things. Like I watch these Gnostics argue with
yeah, yeah,
some
yeah.
Bible scholars on stuff. I'm just into weird stuff. I watch stuff on Atlantis, which is a great made up story, but it's
I love
fun to
Stargate.
listen to.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
Stargate. I love Atlantis. I love all that. I'm a
yeah.
huge sci-fi nerd. But yeah, no, I'll, I'll just wrap it up here because we could go down another whole rabbit hole with this. Go read Andy Stanley, Not in It to Win It. Beautiful book. And what he describes in that book is the whole thing about we call it Old Testament and New Testament. It's actually the wrong words. It should be the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. You
Hmm.
know, Jesus separated us from both, right? The old to the new. And we are now living in new covenant times.
Yep.
Anything in the Old Testament, i.e., the old covenant, was for those people. We can learn from their wisdom, we can learn from their experience, and there is some beautiful, rich wisdom in the Old Testament, but we've got to put it into context. It's
Hmm.
for those people at that time. So all of the Old Testament Bible scriptures that gets thrown around, used as weapons against people, they're using it for the wrong reasons. They're using
Can
it
you
just
just
to justify their own pride.
Yep. Do me one favor for people that don't know. Define what covenant means because I've researched it and I know it, but people might testament covenant. What does that mean? They might not have a clue. So give me just high level. What does covenant mean?
Yeah, to really break it down, I like to break things down into really layman's terms to, you know, I'm not a Bible scholar. I left school at year nine. I haven't done any university or anything like that. So I like to try and break it down in ways that, yeah, the 10-year-old in the room can understand it in that space. So from my understanding, and this is just my understanding, and I'm open to be challenged and wrong, like that's how discipleship works. Basically, covenant means just a set of time and a set of sort of, I don't like to use the word rules because I'm a rule breaker, but
Yep.
you
Same,
know,
same,
set of
same.
a set of guidelines, if you will, that are there for us for our time. And there's a lot in this when going back right through the Bible, right? Got basically from beginning to end, it's just one big love letter to humanity. But the best way I can describe it is three circles, right? So, and you've got this story going out through all the different patterns, whether it be Old Testament to New Testament. But the goal of the new covenant is to, clearly Jesus is the way, there, i.e.,
Mhm.
there's a clue for you. So it is to learn to be in unity, into reconciliation back with God. So when God created the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, he created a perfect world for us. It was God's world. It was heaven here on earth. And essentially humans sinned, right? Like God didn't turn his back on us. We turned our back on God.
Mhm.
And that sin is what broke the covenant relationship. There's a key word, right? Covenant is just relationship, and it's for the people at the time, right? The seasons of the time. So humans turned our back on God. We broke the covenant relationship between us and God in that space, and sin is the thing that separated us from God. So then that brings us into our world, which is a broken world.
Mhm.
And that brokenness is that the sin basically means to miss the target. It's an archery term, right? You fall short of the target. In this case, we fall short of the glory of God. And
Mhm.
it's sin that keeps us separated from God in that space. And in this brokenness, our souls are screaming out to go back to reconciliation, back into unity, back into conversation, relationship with God, our souls. But in our brokenness, in our humanness, in that space, we're looking for ways to escape this broken world. And so we turn to the world's ways. We turn to things like alcohol. We turn to things like addiction, porn, gambling, those type of things. We look for ways to escape, to numb the brokenness. But what we realize in that is that's just more of the same, and we get like it's a bungee cord, right? We get sprung back into the broken world. And this just very much describes my youth, my 20s and stuff, and my early 30s. And so I looked for ways to escape the brokenness, but I kept coming back into it and it just kept going down that spiral, 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 spiral down. That's what the devil, right, is there to keep us in that brokenness, to steal, kill, and destroy and distract, to keep us inside that brokenness, because that's where he controls us. The answer to the equation to come out of that is this third circle. And then this is the story of Jesus, right? The story of the gospel, the new covenant, right? So we've got God's ways in that space in the old covenant time there where people became, Moses and escaped Egypt and all of that sort of thing. And then we've just got those stories after stories after stories that basically summarize the Old Testament times. And there were rules for those times. There was the Ten Commandments and all of that. Moses and God had a really powerful conversation, and then there was the temple, and that was created in that space. And so there were, works for God. There were rules in that space to keep righteous with God, to keep in that relationship with God. But then in that, God's realized that that's just creating more pride. It's just creating more of the same brokenness. So this is the reason why he sent Jesus down to earth to create a better way for us. So Jesus lived a sinless life. He lived a righteous life. He lived a life of sacrifice. He showed us the way. And because God wanted to be back in relationship with us, he sacrificed his only son on the cross.
Hmm.
And that's our salvation part, right? But so Jesus gave us a way, but it doesn't stop there. It only starts there. For us to escape this brokenness, we have to give our life to the Lord and say yes and bend a knee. I'm here to obey your commands and follow you. And in that following, in that discipleship process, in that new covenant process, we then become back into relationship with God, come back into his perfect plan for our lives. But it doesn't stop there. We are now called to go out into the broken world to help other people do the same cycle,
Hmm.
the hero's journey cycle.
Yep.
Right? So even though Joseph Campbell himself was an atheist, I don't think he realized what God had actually placed on his heart.
But
In
truth is truth, and
truth
principle
is
is
truth,
principle, and it
right?
still flows through whether or not he
It-
had the revelation of coming to God. That's not for us to judge, but still that truth, and that's where it goes. You shall know the truth and it will set you free. Well, you have to hear the truth, and that's the
yeah.
part that we need to do.
Well, the
Yeah,
other
I
the
know
other
we
thing too,
okay.
to wrap that up, is truth without love is like a clanging cymbal.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be. It has to be from a place of love, not from a place of hate or pride or religion or
Judgment
I'm
or
better
condemnation.
or yeah.
Yeah,
Can't do that. Can't do that. Jeff, I loved having you on. We're gonna have to do it again. I don't care we went over because it's my podcast. We can go as long as we want.
love it.
But last question for you because I want to pop this at the front. What did we learn today on this show?
Mm, I love you, and that goes between me and you. Yeah, man, I love you, but that also goes between our listeners too and our audience. I love you, I truly do, and the reason I can say that is because of the relationship I do have with Christ, and He loves me. And in that, I really learned learning every day. I don't think I ever stop, learning to love myself. But 12 years ago, I would never have said that. I would have said something to try and impress you, something to try and get the accolades, something to try and get the bullshit performance, award. But here in this moment right now, out of my head and in my heart, I truly love you.
I love you too, man. No, that's better than any great wordsmithing we could do. And to the listeners, maybe you haven't heard that in a while. Maybe you haven't heard someone say that they love you. You might not know Jeff and I personally, but we do. We love you. We want the best for you. Share this episode with someone that it can impact. Share this episode with someone if you want to piss them off. I don't care. Either way, share it because that message needs to go out and needs to be heard. And until next time, we love you. Have a great day and go be amazing.